All right, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining me today on this webinar. This webinar kind of came up very organically as I've been searching for possibly some new pharmacies to purchase and having lots of what became very kind of uncomfortable and tough conversations with some owners. And so I thought that there might be more people in this situation. So I thought I would have a webinar about it. So we're going to be talking about what's your pharmacy worth. I'm going to be just reviewing some tips for maximizing the value of your pharmacy. There might be lots of reasons you want to increase the value of your pharmacy. It may not have to do anything with selling it. It could be, getting financing or a loan or, creating a financial plan or, all kinds of things that, don't have to do with selling. But I think selling is a lot of the reasons why people want to eventually maximize what their pharmacy is worth. So we're going to be diving into that today. So welcome. I am Dr. Lisa Faast. Hello. Nice to meet you if I haven't met you before. I am the CEO and founder of DiversifyRx. We host the annual Pharmacy Profit Summit that happens in March every year. So we have another one coming up in March 2025. We also have Pharmacy Badass University, which is a membership for independent pharmacy owners. And I'm a pharmacy owner myself. And so, as I said, this webinar kind of came because I've been on the hunt for potentially buying another pharmacy. I would love to buy a pharmacy that's kind of close to me. The pharmacies that I own now are kind of far, and I'd like to kind of have one close to me just to have a little bit more of a, kind of your thumb on the pulse, if you will. But I'm interested in others as well. So there's a couple that I'm evaluating. We'll see how those go. But a lot of that time and a lot of that research is spent on figuring out the value of pharmacies. So I am not a banker. I am not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. I am just a pharmacy owner who has a ton of experience of buying and selling pharmacies. At one time I owned, I think, as much as 7. I own 2 right now. I started my first pharmacy from scratch over 20 years ago and sold that one. And, I've been in and out of a couple pharmacies since then. So really, I'm just sharing my experience here and I'm happy to answer any questions. And frankly, this webinar came about because of just my heartbreaking, frankly, having some really difficult conversations with some pharmacy owners about the value of their pharmacy. And for many years, many generations, the pharmacy owner, they ran their business. They, took home a salary. They, were able to buy a house, buy a car, and maybe send their kids to college. And then at the end, they were able to sell their pharmacy for a nice little pot of cash. And that pot of cash turned into their retirement and life was good. Life has changed in pharmacy if you haven't noticed. If you're old like me, you most definitely have noticed. If you're young, this might kind of feel normal to you. But unfortunately, there's lots of pharmacy owners that aren't taking profit out while they're operating their pharmacy because their pharmacies aren't generating the profit. And then the big pot of cash isn't coming at the end of the rainbow when they go to sell their pharmacies. And so we're going to be diving into not just the calculation for what your pharmacy worth, because frankly, you could Google that and you don't have to listen to me for 45 minutes or however long we're going to be on today. What I'm going to dive in a little bit more is why a pharmacy has certain value, what can make it go up, what can make it go down, kind of give you a little bit of the insight to that buyer's mindset. Since I'm a buyer, just kind of share a little bit. Certainly we'll go over some of the calculations and numbers and the financials, because ultimately that's a lot of what carries the weight of the pharmacy value. But what is your pharmacy worth? The short answer that nobody likes to hear is what somebody's willing to pay for it. Whether that's a bank, how much they're willing to pay for it, how much a cash buyer is willing to pay for it. Ultimately, that's what your value is what somebody else deems it. And that's a terrible answer that nobody likes because that leads to unpredictability. And even if you talk to the most experienced pharmacy brokers, which we're friends with lots of pharmacy brokers, they will say, here's some averages, but they've we've also seen those way outliers. Like my husband and I just bought a house in Oklahoma to renovate and, to eventually rent out. What that house is worth is what somebody's willing to pay for it, right? Wait, somebody places value on it. Just like when you go and you buy a house and you get a mortgage, and there's appraisal. Same kinds of things for pharmacy. Like both parties kind of have to agree and come to an agreement. So let's kind of talk about what your pharmacy is worth. And it really depends on who you ask or why you're asking that question. I had a pharmacy owner call me a week ago and was like, hey, I'd like to talk to you about the value of my pharmacy. How can I come up with the value of the pharmacy? And it's like, I can't just spit out a mathematical equation because it really depends who's asking and what's the purpose of you want to know why the value of your pharmacy. We're going to talk about some of the classics. So an independent buyer versus a chain buyer. Why is the value different? So if I'm an independent pharmacy buyer and I go to buy a pharmacy and I'm going to keep your location, that means I'm keeping all of your overhead. I'm keeping your rent. I'm keeping your property taxes. I'm keeping all your employees. So my operating expenses are going to be nearly equal. Obviously, I might run it a little more efficient, but it's going to be nearly equal to what your operating expenses are. However, if you're going to sell to a chain across the street from you, they're going to absorb the business, the revenue, but they're not going to absorb the expenses. And so for them, that's why chains are often able to pay more for a business than if you sell it to an independent, because the independent's keeping all your operating expenses, whereas a chain is only absorbing the revenue, not absorbing the operating expenses. Therefore, gross profit becomes net profit, and that's a very profitable way to grow their business. So just want to give you some perspective on why a chain might offer you $800,000 and an independent buyer offer you $400,000. It's not that the independent buyer necessarily is trying to screw you. It's just that the business means different because of the numbers and because what's going to be happening to the business after the sale. A buyer versus a banker. Okay, so if you're looking at an evaluation, maybe you're going to go get a loan, or maybe you want to use your business as collateral for something, as opposed to like selling it to a buyer. A banker is only going to value the business at what they feel they can sell it for and sell it under unfavorable conditions. So if you're like to default on the loan, what could they sell the assets of the business for? So they generally are looking at the physical properties, like your drug inventory, they could probably sell that. Your fixtures, they could sell. Your computers, they could sell. Some of those kinds of things that have real tangible value. So bankers often value businesses like pharmacies, where the value of our goods and services is in these things like electronic prescription files, which is hard for them to understand the value. A banker is going to often evaluate a pharmacy for a much lower value amount than a buyer would, because a buyer is going to be able to generate income off of all of those assets, whereas the bank would just be fire selling. So again, that's why it's really important when you're kind of talking about the value of your pharmacy, like who's asking and for what purpose. Same thing with debt collectors. Debt collectors are going to value certain things in your businesses a whole lot less, because if you ever default on the debt, they're fire selling your stuff. They're not selling your computers for top dollars. They're not selling, your pharmacy shelves for top dollar. They're, fire selling everything. So again, their value is probably going to be a lot lower. So I am kind of wanted to start it off there with just a little bit of perspective, because many of you may not be interested in selling. You might be many years away from that, but you're interested in what the value is worth and things that it can do for you, and why you might see different values for the exact same business is because a lot of those factors. So we're going to dive into a little bit of the terms you need to know. So if you're talking with a bank, you're talking with finance, loan, any of these kinds of accounting people, I want you to just be aware of some of the common terms so that you're better prepared to have a more intelligent conversation. So you've probably heard the term EBITDA, right? EBITDA is a word, an acronym, EBITDA. That's why you always see it capitalized, because it's kind of like a made-up word. And it's using the first letter of all of these words. So earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization is what EBITDA stands for, okay? And you're like, okay, I still don't understand what EBITDA is. All right. So EBITDA is often used to value companies of all types. You'll hear publicly traded companies. You'll hear if somebody's acquired, they paid, 25x EBITDA or something like that. So EBITDA is just a way to evaluate the company of how much money and earnings a company produces from its operations. So that's really the most important thing to do. The goal is to show the profits from the operations of the business without calculating any debt or any mandated payments. So like when that business machine is running, how much cash is it producing from its normal course of business? That's kind of the way you can think of EBITDA. It's a fancy way of saying net profit. All right. But if you want to, that way, if somebody throws out some words at you, you're like, EBITDA, net profit. Okay, got it there. It's not an exact correlation, but it's really, really close. So it's perfectly fine to think of it in those terms, especially when talking about our businesses. Ad backs. I just did a recent blog series and video series on ad backs because ad backs are critical, especially for small businesses, especially like pharmacies. So an ad back is an adjustment to your financial statement that adds back certain expenses. So let's talk a little bit about that. So what are certain expenses? Certain expenses are those expenses that a new owner would not expect to incur. So for example, in one of my pharmacy that I started, my very first pharmacy, I hired a nanny, and a nanny was on payroll. Perfectly legal. I'm paying her payroll. But she didn't work in the pharmacy. She was my nanny. And so if a buyer wanted to evaluate buying my pharmacy, a nanny wouldn't be a normal expense that they would occur. So I could add back that nanny's expenses to my financial statements because they wouldn't have to pay her, and they could take back, whatever her salary was and add it back to the profit to the business because she wasn't necessary. This is also seen a lot if somebody like pays their spouse. You own the pharmacy and you pay your spouse $100,000 a year, but the spouse doesn't actually perform any necessary, absolute must-do, jobs in the pharmacy. So that salary of the spouse could be added back. So hopefully that kind of gives you some perspective on add backs. Most common like excessive wages for families, maybe legal expenses. Maybe you had a lawsuit or you were involved with something, and so you had $100,000 legal bill. That's a legit expense, but it's not an expense that the new owner is expected to incur. So you could put it on your expense sheet for your financial statements, but when you're looking at the evaluation, you can add it back because that owner is generally not going to have a lawsuit every year that they're going to have to pay. So you're adding back expenses that a new owner is not expected to occur. So it's a more accurate picture of your operational cash and operational profit that your pharmacy can make. So it's really, really important to work on these add backs. And I will say, evaluating tons of pharmacies' financial statements, this is probably the area that is screwed up the most. They either add back way too much and they're like, yeah, this, extra technician doesn't really need it, and this extra pharmacist really isn't. It's like, if they weren't really needed, you wouldn't be having them in your business, So, or it's not considered at all, and they don't do it at all. And so the profit of the pharmacy looks really, really small, but that's because they're paying their spouse $200,000 a year, but they don't add it back in. So this is really, really important. I think an area where most pharmacy owners screw up when either presenting financial statements, maybe even working with the broker, trying to sell their pharmacy, talking with people. They just don't handle add backs correctly. So goodwill is something you're going to hear whenever you're talking about the sale of a business. And so the goodwill is an intangible asset, meaning that it cannot be touched or seen. All right. So it's intangible. However, it's very important. It's the additional value that the buyer receives from the sale of the business that's over fair market value of its assets. And for pharmacy, a lot of the purchase price of a pharmacy is goodwill. And that's how you'll see it categorized, because the inventory is worth a certain amount, the fixtures and computers are worth certain amounts, but it's like, where does this other value come from? And it's the goodwill of the pharmacy files, that you've done such a good job taking care of these patients that they're going to continue to go to that pharmacy, that they're not just going to bail out when they see a new pharmacist behind the counter. And so it's generally understood to mean the ability of the business to obtain and retain customers on its reputation. So if you have a crappy reputation, you get, the FBI raids you and you get shut down, you don't have any probably goodwill left. But if you've been in business for 50 years, you're third generation pharmacist, you're looking to sell your pharmacy to another independent, like that independent buyer is buying a lot of goodwill. You've spent 50 years building up a stellar reputation. So you're going to be able to charge a little bit more because you have a better product. So really, it just raises the value of your product, which is your business that you are selling. So and this is important when it gets into taxes. It can be institutional, what's called enterprise goodwill, and it can be professional, which is known as personal goodwill. So if you've been the only pharmacist to ever work in the pharmacy for 50 years and you're now retiring, you hold a lot of personal goodwill. If suddenly you disappear, does that goodwill disappear too? That's where sometimes clauses of like working for a year or helping to transition the pharmacy, you can charge a lot for that because it's goodwill. It's not just based on your hourly rate. You're helping the business retain the business of the customers by being there. And so that becomes important for tax implications whenever you're selling your pharmacy. So I just want to make sure to put that in there. All right. Not all goodwill is transferable upon sale. If you've been that only pharmacist for 50 years and you're like, no, I'm selling and I'm retiring to Fiji and I'm never going to be seen in the pharmacy again, you kind of lose that goodwill. And that's obviously up to you to make. So goodwill doesn't always have to be sold in terms of the terms of the agreement. All right, operating income. This is the money that your business produces, that your pharmacy produces during the normal operations of the business. So for you, it's selling prescriptions, dispensing prescriptions. Maybe it's health and wellness tests, compounding, doing consulting, doing weight loss services. Like that's normal operations. If you owned a real estate, building and you sold half your building, that wouldn't be money from normal operations because your normal operations isn't real estate. So you wouldn't include the sale of an asset in that when the buyer, because they're not buying the real estate, they're going to be able to sell it. So you'd have to take out that revenue from non-normal business operations. The operating income is generally referred to as the money you have after your cost of goods sold. So like for us, our drug cost and your operating expenses, but before paying any interest, debt, or taxes. Because when you're looking at the sale of a pharmacy, my taxes, when I'm looking to buy a pharmacy, your taxes might be different than my taxes. I can almost guarantee you. And so we don't generally include taxes in there. And the interest you pay is probably going to be the interest that I pay. You might have different loans than the loans that I will have. So operating income for our world of pharmacy is going to be the most important factor of determining what a pharmacy makes. So we don't generally look at EBITDA, which is the first phraseology that I told you guys about. We tend to look at operating income because we're talking about personal owners here. You own your pharmacy. I'm looking to buy the pharmacy. My personal circumstances for taxes, interest, and debt is highly different than probably your personal circumstances for taxes, interest, and debt. When corporations are being sold, like publicly traded companies, they use EBITDA because from a corporate standpoint, the interest, taxes, and debt tend to be more similar than for small businesses where you're talking about individuals that own a business. So for us, operating income is probably going to be the more important factor rather than just EBITDA. So financials, anytime you look to anybody, I get a message that says, hey, I'm thinking about selling my pharmacy. Would you be interested in buying it? The very first thing out of my mouth is send me your financials. So what does that mean? What does financials mean? All right. It's a collective term for three financial statements. Your profit and loss sheet, it's often referred to as P&L, also can be referred to as income statement. Your balance sheet, which is your assets and liabilities, and your cash flow statement. Really, as a buyer, I'm looking at the profit and loss and the balance sheet. Most pharmacies, I've rarely seen a pharmacy owner have a cash flow statement. So that's okay. You're fine there. I can do the math and figure out the cash flow from the first ones. So profit and loss and balance sheet, those are going to be the main two ones. Like when you're talking to a buyer like me and they say, hey, I want your financials. That's what they're talking about. Okay. Talking about your P&L, talking about your balance sheet. And usually for the last 3 years. Obviously, lots of changes happened in pharmacy. We want to see what's happened with the business through those tumultuous years. Your most recent year is going to be the most important. What's that? Is it an upward path? Is it a downward path? But it's usually 3 years is what we're looking for and what I'm asking for. You should receive financials every month. Okay. If you're not receiving financials every month, that's a problem. It's a problem for lots of reasons. One, because you're not informed as the owner to be able to make decisions to make your business better. But it's harder to catch mistakes. If you look at financials every 6 months or once a year, it's hard to catch mistakes when you're not looking at it. And trust me, mistakes happen, things get put on the wrong line. I love my bookkeeper, love my accountants, but things happen. So should be receiving financials every month. And that way you're tracking, what your trends are. It should not be a surprise to you. You're giving your financial statements to a buyer and they're like, oh, your business has gone down significantly in the last 3 years. It shouldn't be a surprise to you. You should be looking at these things every month. Another term that you might hear is right-sized financials. And so what does that mean? So if I'm looking at 5 different pharmacies, their financials all look completely different, obviously. Different chart of accounts, as it's called, different way that things are laid out. I'm looking at dollars. I'm trying to compare, this net profit from this $3 million pharmacy and this net profit from this $8 million pharmacy. Like, how in the world is it easy to compare? So right sizing is turning things into percentages, not just dollars. So if you look at financial statements, it'll be like, hey, you made, $100,000 net income. And that's a percentage of the revenue. So it'll turn it into a percentage. I love looking at right-sized financial statements because it makes it so much easier for me. If you want to make your life easier for buyers, have both your dollar statements and your right-sized, your percentage statements. And that really helps to be able, makes KPIs super easy. I don't have to do any math. I can just look at the right-sized column and I know exactly what your percentage of income, your gross margin, your expenses, like all those kinds of things. It makes evaluating financial statements so much easier. So if you're producing them, if you use QuickBooks or anything like that, they can do this automatically with just push of a little button. So you might be asked for right-sized statements, and that's what it means. It means percentages. So I just want to kind of give you guys that. So that's it of our vocabulary lesson. Will not be on the test later. I just want to give it to you to refer to later. And yes, Deepa, we will make the presentation slides available because there is so much kind of information in there that I want you guys to be able to have this. If you ever are prepared for a buyer or talking to a banker or things like that, like I want you to feel confident in having those conversations. Pharmacy is our expertise, maybe not banking, but it's not hard and you can get there. I know you're all smart cookies. So calculating your pharmacy's value. Now that we kind of know some of these terms, how the heck do you calculate your pharmacy's value? So we're going to go through some of the calculations. I want to give you some nice, good tactics to do that. So per script, very common per script. This is used mostly by chains because again, they're just buying your revenue. They're not buying your expenses. So they don't care about your expenses. They don't care if you had 10 too many people on your payroll because they're only buying the files. So most often the per script a way of calculating a pharmacy is just usually used by chains or if they're going to absorb your location. So if there's only 2 independents in town and the other independent's going to buy the files, they would probably do it by this per script method as well. So it's when an existing pharmacy is going to be incorporated to another existing pharmacy. And that's generally. So I have seen ranges literally all over the board by this. Okay. I've seen as low as $5 and as low as $15. And this is per annual script filled. So add up all the prescriptions you filled in the last 12 months, multiply it by one of these numbers, and like, there's your ballpark value. And you might be thinking, wow, that's really good. Or wow, it really sucks. Like, depending on which way you look at that. So if we just take a $200 or 200 script day pharmacy, times it by 23 business days a month, times by 12 months a year, you come up with about 55,000 scripts in a year. If you multiply that by 5, you're at a value of 276,000. You multiply it by 15, you're at 828,000. Very different numbers, obviously. So then your question is like, well, what causes the range of numbers? It's going to based on the region. It's going to based on the demographics. It's going to based on maybe how desperate the buyer thinks you are. If you're on the verge of bankruptcy and you are trying to avoid an all-out, complete financial ruin, they feel you're a little more desperate, they're going to lowball you. I mean, let's just face it. When I sold my first pharmacy, the first offer I was given compared to the final offer, I think I increased it over 3x, like 3 times the amount. So generally speaking, like if a chain is going to be sending you an offer, their first offer is always a low ball offer. Like I've never seen it not be a low ball offer. Could be, I've seen grocery stores like that are opening pharmacies, and there's like one main pharmacy in town. I've seen them like almost overpay for that because they want to shut you down and have everybody come through the grocery store, because having everybody come into the pharmacy through the grocery store is so profitable for them. So it really depends on a lot of factors. And that's why there's a lot of variability in this, and you will see a wide range. All right. So doesn't mean necessarily, it doesn't always mean about you. It's sometimes about them and their business strategies. So if they think that you're going to close and they get the scripts anyway, they might lowball you. If they want to guarantee everybody comes in like the grocery stores, they might overpay you. So the range can be there. So I just want to help give you some guidance. So a multiple of EBITDA, okay? This, take your dollars of EBITDA on average for the previous 3 years, and then you multiply it by some number, by X. You'll hear like X, 25X, 3X, 10X, as you talk, if you listen to any financial channels about businesses being bought and sold. I would say for pharmacies, for independent pharmacies, the average multiplier is a 3, so 3x. 2023 obviously was a hard year, hard hit on pharmacies. Most people did not pivot their businesses the way that it needed to be. So that multiple has actually gone down. I would say probably to a 2.5 for most pharmacies. And that's because they're not producing very much profit. They're poorly ran pharmacies. They may not have the best staff. And so kind of that goodwill, that multiple is pushed lower. So I would say the average is 3. Probably a more recent average of the last 12 months is a 2.5. So, you take your EBITDA, multiply it by 2.5. All right. I would say this can vary from 0 to 5 is the broad range. 0 is some of those pharmacies that are just like, you're on the verge of collapse. Somebody can come in and just kind of take over operations. They're not really buying any profitable business. There really isn't business there. It's basically just inventory, assets, and fixtures. So it's really a multiple of 0. And I've seen really profitable pharmacies, very well-run pharmacies, highly diversified prescriptions, highly diversified prescriber base. I've seen multiples be up as high as 5. So it very much can vary, but I think the average is around that 2.5 to 3. And then again, what makes the range different based on demographics of the prescription, the stability of the business. Did you just get a whole bunch of new business and you haven't had it for very long? Have you been losing business? Have you been disappointing people and people have been leaving? Is the town shrinking? Is the town growing? So some things are out of your control in terms of that. The diversity of prescriptions, do 80% of your prescriptions come from 2 doctors? That's more concerning for a buyer than if 80% of your prescriptions came from 10 prescribers. That's a more stable business. Back-end opportunities to the buyer, for sure. So what else can they do with those patients? If a pharmacy has a strong back-end opportunity, you do a bunch of supplement sales, you do a bunch of testing, you have DME, you have all these add-on revenue streams, that's more valuable to a buyer because they don't have to create it all. So they're willing to pay you for doing all that work. So there's a lot of things that play into what that multiple is and what your pharmacy might deserve. All right, so calculate your value. If you take just a few moments here, if you take some of those numbers, like if you know what your operating income or your EBITDA is, if you net income, and you multiply it by, let's say 3, an average, is the value of the pharmacy what you thought it would be? We're not talking top line revenue. You might be a $4 million pharmacy, but if you only have net income of 80,000, then 80,000 times 3 would be 240,000. Is that what you thought your pharmacy would be worth? Is it what you want? Does it make up for all of your years of hard work? I talk to way too many pharmacy owners that are not paying themselves or paying themselves a very minimal salary, because you hope to make it up when you sell. And that's just not the way our industry, unfortunately, is panning out these days. You've got to figure out a way to pay yourself in the meantime, and hopefully then also get a payout at the end. Does it pay you back plus profit? Okay. Too many times I think pharmacy owners are settling for a job rather than owning a business. So if your pharmacy ownership only pays you what you can make as a pharmacist salary, you're not getting paid back plus profit. Like you're risking a lot as a pharmacy owner. You should be making back profit to pay you back for that risk. So just take it for a moment. I'll shut up for about 60 seconds and just think about these things with the kind of like those numbers that we just went through. And what are these questions? So I'll shut up and I'll give you guys just 60 seconds to just kind of think about it, do some of the back of the napkin math. So if you were like any of the many pharmacy owners that I have talked to recently in evaluating their pharmacies, you are not happy with that number. It's not as much as you thought it would be. It certainly is not what you want. It does not make up for your years of hard work. It does not make up for your years of lack of pay. Certainly does not pay you a profit. So what do you do now? Somebody just saying, so for the amount of work I'm doing, it's not even close to what I would want. You're not alone in that. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about how you can turn that around. Somebody else mentioned another impactful factor is the lease and how big is the rent of leasing. Certainly, because that goes into your operating expenses for sure. So, for example, I don't look at a pharmacy with a lease of more than $3,000 unless it is a super special pharmacy. Like if you have a lease and it's more than $3,000, I just don't even look at it, because I know that's just too much operating expense tied up in a lease for what the typical pharmacy does. Now, there are, like I said, special cases, maybe big compounder or something like that. But, so there's certain things, out there. So certainly your lease could be ahead of it. Yes, we will be sending out a recording. Absolutely. No problemo. All right. So no change equals no change. I remember my English teacher, my senior year in high school, God bless him. He always had this written on the chalkboard, and he would write it in different places every day. And I think this is really important for pharmacy owners. If you haven't changed the way that you have ran your business, your business hasn't changed. And if you don't change in the future how you run your business isn't going to change. And so to come up with a different number, that different value that you might be looking for, you're going to have to make some changes. And change is hard. Like there's that saying, change is hard. You go first. Like, I think it comes from the book, Who Moved My Cheese? Love that book, by the way. But change is hard. I mean, change is hard as human beings. Human beings just don't like change. It's not something special to pharmacy owners. So I think if you don't like where your number's at, you're not happy with it, if it makes you a little pissed off, makes you a little sad, it can be changed. All right. But you have to change. You have to change as the leader, as the pharmacy. You have to change. That change that has to trickle down to your staff. And change is hard work. All right. Change does not come easy. Otherwise, everybody would change. Right. So I just want to preface that. All right. So if you're not happy with your current estimated value, then now was the time to make changes. It takes time to make change. Okay. Like it does not happen overnight. If it did, I would be like 30 pounds lighter and, would be super happy, but it doesn't happen that way. All right. Change takes time. It takes time to implement. It takes time for those changes to flow through to your financials, and buyers want consistency. So if you had a really crappy one year and then all of the next, you have this amazing year, and you're like, but look, I have this amazing year. And you're like, yeah, you did that for 1 year. Like anybody can do anything for a short amount of time. Like, so Buyers want to see consistency. Again, most buyers are asking for 3 years financial statements, usually a minimum of 2. So any change, if you're going to be boosting your pharmacy, boosting revenue, changing some things, you generally want to be able to sustain that for at least 2 years, ideally for 3 years. Okay. And I know sometimes looking at timelines like that is hard. Like you're like, shit, I have to do this for another 3 years. I have to do this for another 4 years. Like you might, like life is hard. It's either hard now or it's hard later. I prefer to take the hard now. I'm hoping to have an easy life later in my life. Like I take hard now. So let's talk about some of those changes. Okay. 4 ways. I'm going to give you guys 4 ways to increase your value. All right. And I would be remiss if I didn't do a shameless plug for myself here. This does not count at one of the 4 ways, but we make change happen at DiversifyRx. Like that is my goal, my entire reason I live for pharmacy owners is our Pharmacy Badass University. Like we make change happen. I believe education and information is useless unless you actually put it into action and you change your behavior because of that. And a lot of people ask, like, what do you do? What do you do for pharmacy owners? This is, this is not a pitch, but this is just an example. You need a system. You need something to help you make those changes. Just like people hire personal trainers or they hire, coaches for their kid for soccer or whatever. Like that's because somebody has a system. It's easier to follow a system than it is to figure it out all on your own. So this is just a shameless plug. That is what we do inside Pharmacy Badass University. So if you ever wondered what we do, that's what we do. I make change happen for pharmacy owners. All right, back into our increases. So 1, you have to increase gross profit, okay? Gross profit, now you're like, well, what the heck is gross profit? I need to know gross profit before I increase it. So your gross profit is your revenue minus your cost of goods sold. So if you look at your P&L, if you have $4 million in revenue in a pharmacy and you spent $3 million on drugs, then your gross profit is $1 million or 25%. That would be really good. That 25% gross profit would be good for a pharmacy. So one of the ways that you can increase the value is to increase your gross profit. Okay. So how do you do that? It's simple math, right? I gave you the math. Gross profit equals revenue minus cost of goods. If I subtract a lower number from cost of goods, I'm going to have higher gross profit. So lowering your cost of goods is going to be critical. This is one of the reasons why I am such a proponent of use more secondaries, okay? Doesn't have to dump your primary. My pharmacies still have a primary too. We just use a heck of a lot more of our secondaries and we don't chase rebates, all right? Get a better buying group. Some buying groups are better than others. Many times buying groups are what's screwing you. Like, I'm just going to be honest with y'all. If your buying group requires you to purchase 99% of the stuff through their buying group, they are not doing what's best for you, in my opinion, because our industry has changed. 10 to 15 years ago, buying 99% of your stuff from your buying group and your primary was a surefire way to get the absolute lowest cost of drugs in order for you to make a better profit. That is just not the case nowadays. So get a better buying group, one that has low requirements, low generic requirements. You want to generally look for at least WAC minus 4.5. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about with WAC and minus 4.5, WAC officially stands for warehouse or wholesale acquisition cost. Not that that's actually what it means, but that's what the letters stand for. And minus 4.5 is 4.5% lower than WAC. Okay, so if your buying group doesn't have, if they require really high generic amounts in order for you to get some certain things, that is a terrible buying group. Okay, so better buying group, low generic requirements, and at least WAC minus 4.5 on their brands. Stop filling negative margin prescriptions, okay? Negative margin is negative gross profit, okay? It's losing money before any of your operating expenses are even in there. So stop filling lower negative margin prescriptions. How do you do that? There's several ways. I'm a big fan of Retail My Meds. Love Retail My Meds. Shout out to Retail My Meds. Erica owns it. She's a pharmacy owner. She's actually one of our Pharmacy Badass University members as well. It helps you to transfer those prescriptions to mail orders so you aren't filling the losers, but you get to keep all the winners. If you pay lower for your cost of drugs, you will have more profits in there. Sometimes it's saying no to business. And that's a whole other webinar for a whole different day, but sometimes you have to say no. Sometimes it's understanding that you may be in the wrong PSAO. Our great friends over Kyle at ICBN does these amazing PSAO analytics. It might be better off going on a direct contract. There's lots of ways to kind of work around those negative margin prescriptions that make better decisions for your business. All right. Okay. So we're talking about increasing gross profit still, but we're going to talk about the other side of the equation. Okay. So we talked about the cost of goods. So now we're talking about increasing the amount reimbursed. Okay. So if you have more revenue, then you have more space between the cost of the drug and more revenue. Okay. So what can you do there? I'd love to say I have some magic trick to magically increase all your revenue. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist. Sorry. But there are some things that you can do. I'm a big fan of direct billing models. I love Stream Care for workers' comp, love BetterRx for hospice. That can turn those probably forgotten and tossed aside prescriptions and patients into very profitable prescriptions because you're cutting out the PBM. Okay. So direct billing models for those. There's also companies like pricing systems that can work with some of the pricing tables inside your PMS software that can help increase the reimbursement. Fill higher margin prescriptions. There are still higher margin prescriptions out there. All right. Like one of my favorites that just came out right now is oxyprozin 300 milligrams. It's doing fantastic. It's not covered everywhere. I'd say probably 60% of insurances, but there are some still higher margin prescriptions. Know what is higher margin for you, know what benefits your patients, and talk to other owners. Be a part of some group. If you're not a part of Pharmacy Badass University, be a part of some other group where you can share that information. You find out what's working for somebody else and be like, oh, I didn't even know that drug existed. I have some patients that could probably benefit from that. So, talk to people about those higher margins. Optimizing pricing tables. I just mentioned that with pricing systems. When I implemented them, we implemented across all of the pharmacies. There's 9 pharmacies in our group. And I think the average overall was like $1.30 increase per prescription. Some pharmacies saw like 70 cents, some saw like over $2. So, but optimizing your pricing tables, if you've never done that, it's probably a good time to do that. Don't forget about 340B, man. 340B, if you have a chance to work for 340B, first off, do it right, because you can do 340B really wrong and really screw your pharmacy. But 340B can make prescriptions, particularly brands that you're losing money on, and turn those into brands that you make really good money on. So our friends at Secure 340B, we love them. If you're interested in 340B, I would definitely talk with them. But make sure you do 340B right. The first year I did 340B in my very first pharmacy, I had no idea and I completely did it wrong. I've made all those mistakes. You don't want to go through those pains. So do 340B right, and it'll actually be a big boost to your pharmacy. All right. So we want to increase operational income. Let's see, there's a question here. How do I lower cost of goods if the wholesaler can't lower the cost or give me discounts? Use a different wholesaler. All right. There are tons of options out there. I'm a big fan of secondaries like Real Value Products, RX Cherry Pick. There's marketplaces like EsriRx, shop at MatchRx for, great pharmacy to pharmacy purchases. There is a ton of options out there. So use a different wholesaler. The power of options is kind of on our side right now as pharmacy owners. There literally used to only be the big 3. That's why they call them the big 3. But even the smaller wholesalers, kind of geographical wholesalers, but there's so many secondaries right now that you can pay the lowest price possible, get 30 to 45 dating, so your cash flow is good. Like, there's lots of ways to do that. So many PBM are ABWP minus. So minus 4.5 is in the range of, I do not try to remember Keyshore, I do not try to remember the AWP to WAC like math conversions. I have a nice little table that I give to myself. And if you want, I can send that to you, or if you're interested, I can send it in the recording or whatnot. But because I do not try to remember the math of converting between those because I always screw it up. So I'll send that to you later. But if you buy brands at minus 4.5, you'll be okay on most commercial. Medicare, sometimes Medicare, like you just kind of have to like, we're going to lose money on Medicare brands. If you want to know more about Medicare, though, the webinar that we just did with the Medicare with ICBN and Kyle going over all of the plans, some of them are absolutely devastating and some of them actually aren't so bad. So, you know, but at least it gives you a fighting chance on brands, and it allows you to, for most plans, not lose money and to at least keep that patient. And then I'm a big fan, obviously, of back-end opportunities. And if I can sell them a bunch of more stuff, then that patient overall becomes more profitable to me. And it's not just about dispensing their prescriptions. All right, so increase operational income. Okay, so what is operational income? It's your revenue minus your cost of goods minus your operating expenses. Okay, so your operational income is basically what you have left over. That's the money that you and I care about that lands in our wallet. All right. So some strategies for that: increase your cash-based profits. And there's different buckets for cash-based. There's your OTCs, there's your services, and there's your cash prescriptions. Okay. Many of you have done that with compounding, you know, semaglutide, tirzepatide, whether you're compounding yourself, selling somebody else's compounded, all of that is cash-based. I've heard from many of our members inside Pharmacy Badass University that have made more than 6 figures, you know, in the last just a few months of that. So that's a great way to increase operational income, is to focus on some cash-based profits. Decrease your expenses. Here's where your expenses should be. I will kid you not. I have looked at some pharmacies that have payroll expenses at over 22%, and that's generally your entire gross profit. So it's like every dollar, if they sold a drug for $100, they bought it for 80, that entire $20 was going to payroll. That left no room for anything else. It's like, no wonder they had a $300,000 line of credit on their house that was completely tapped out. You have to understand where your expenses should be. This is where you can kind of compare yourself to the industry to be able to optimize your operations, because you have to run your pharmacy different nowadays than you did even 5 years ago. All right. But definitely for those of you that are a little bit older like me, 5, 10, 15 years ago, we have to run your pharmacy completely different. So your payroll should be at the most 13%, better at its less than 11. I will tell you that most of my pharmacies are all around the 9% mark. So we run very tight pharmacies. I tend to buy really good people. Like I have employees that are really good. You actually get more bang for your buck than having 2 mediocre employees. So that's one way that we do that. But get your payroll where it should be. Many of you are very nice people, and you just don't want to fire people, even though they need to go. Let me tell you, Susan sucks and Susan needs to go. All right. That's a whole other, again, another conversation for another webinar, but get your payroll where it needs to be. Okay. Your total expenses. So your expenses for your rent, your payroll, carpet cleaning, you know, all of those kinds of things should be less than 19% of your revenues. All right. Getting your expenses under control is going to produce a higher operational income. Make every expense dollar earn its place in your wallet. Okay. You know, if the local T-ball team comes asking for donations or asking for a sponsor, it's not that I'm a cold-hearted biatch that says just say no to all of that. If you're going to say yes, then by golly, you better work your butt off to make that sponsorship make you more money than you spent on it. Okay. And if you're not going to do the work to make it work, then you should say no. Because that's useless dollars going out, and your P&L cannot afford for useless dollars going out. Even like for members of Pharmacy Badass University, like my commitment to them is I want to earn my place in your wallet. Like you should make more money being a part of us than not being a part of us. So that's really important. So make every expense line in your P&L statement earn its place. All right. It should have a purpose for being there and shouldn't be there accidentally. All right. So getting a higher multiple, okay? So this is ways you can get a higher multiple. So we talked about lowering your cost of goods, talked about maybe increasing your revenue, talked about decreasing your expenses. Now here are some ways that you can get a higher multiple. Okay, so make your X bigger. We want to make the X bigger, okay? Be special, all right? Have something unique. Have a certain special contract. Like if you have the contracts for all the county jails, okay? Have a special way of doing business. Have a service that no one else has. This can be quite hard. Okay, just gonna be honest with you. Like to be unique, to be different in pharmacy, you have to. It's hard. I know, like in my first pharmacy, we worked with all the plastic surgeons, and that was like kind of an area of business that like I owned. Like there wasn't any other pharmacies that were really working with them. Like they all came to me, and so it can be done. Just know that that's a little bit harder. So if you're working on, you want to make your X bigger, and you're like, I don't like the 2.5. I really like the way 3.5 looks. This can definitely be a way to do it, but just know that it can be a little harder. All right. Become a piece of a bigger pie. Okay, so I was actually just at my mastermind meeting the last 3 days in Austin, and there are a ton of business buyers in there. And one of the ways that they make money is they buy a lot of small businesses in a single niche. They combine all those businesses together, and then they sell the business to somebody even bigger. So big fish like to buy smaller fish, but not teeny tiny fish. And so one of the ways that you can increase your X is to become a part of a bigger pie. And there are some people out there doing that. Like, so those independent pharmacy chains that become, 60, 70, 100 pharmacies, they sell for way more per store than your individual pharmacy will. And that's because when they're making the acquisition, they're getting a whole lot more patient, they're getting a whole lot more data, they're getting a whole lot more potential. So you can become a piece of the bigger pie. One of the best ways to do that in independent pharmacy is with Carex. So you might have heard of Carex, you've seen them out there. They were actually at our summit last year, but this might be the best opportunity for pharmacy owners who are looking to sell about in the next 5 years. What they're doing is they're putting a group of pharmacies together. They want to get close to 1,000 in order to be able to sell it off and get that higher X. So your individual store might get a 2.5, 3, or 3.5. They're probably talking about a 10X in terms of that when you put all of those pharmacies together. So you can do this on a big level, like with Carex. You can do this. That's why some pharmacy owners, they start to acquire store after store after store, and they get 10, and they sell that because you're there talking probably about doubling your multiple. So there are some ways that you can make your X bigger. That I think that's a good opportunity for some pharmacies. That might be the easiest way to get that higher multiple. Let's see. Some people have put in some questions. A balance between Medicare Part D and private RX. Lesser Part D is better for operating margins lately. Yes, mostly because of brands. So Medicare Part D on generics, now again, depending on the Medicare Part D plan, and if you want a good analysis of that, I would say go watch our Medicare webinar with ICBN that goes through all of the major plans. For Medicare, generics can be pretty good. So, but if it's about getting rid of the losers and still keeping the winners. What you don't want is, to just discard the entire patient because they have one bad prescription, and therefore you don't get any of the benefit. Then you don't get any of the OTC sales. You don't get any of the DME. You don't get any of the vaccines. Like, you kind of lose access to that patient. So I like figuring out ways to optimize the patient, keep access to the patient, but also not lose money. And that's where Retail My Meds comes in with those loser prescriptions. All right, there's another question here. I'm not a pharmacist, but a CPA. I struggle with this understanding the proper accounting for 340B. Would be interested. Yeah, 340B financials is almost like an entire different ballgame. You talk to a couple different pharmacists and a couple different stories. Yes, so 340B is amazing, can be amazing, but understanding the financials is very difficult. It's very difficult even for seasoned pharmacy financial people like me that know 340B. It is a huge headache because you can't really identify like necessarily every specific claim that might be a 340B, especially if you're in like a bigger, a little bit more like metro area. If you're in a really small town, like one of the first pharmacies I worked at before I owned pharmacies, you know, they had one clinic. And so like all the pharmacies, all the prescriptions from that clinic were 340B, like it's a little easier to figure out. But that's where I would definitely, Steve, reach out to Secure 340B. They actually have like this whole software thing. They help you with the financial side of things, but because you're not paying for the drugs with 340B. So, you know, if I have my drug here, I bought this, I paid $50 for this to have it on my shelf. But if I dispense it to 340B, I dispense it, but I get it replaced for free. But my computer system doesn't know that I got it replaced for free. So it still has that $50 cost in there. And it does make for very messy financials. So you are absolutely correct. And it's possible to still do the financials for 340B. So Gary gave us some whack things. That sounds about right there. I just never try to remember. I have my little thing. All right. So it is possible to get a higher multiple. If you're looking at selling in 5 years, you might want to evaluate Carex, because I do think that they have a really good plan to maximize that selling value. If that's your goal. All right. The last one to cover here is increasing your script count. Okay. So one of the ways that you can increase your volume. If you know you're going to sell to a chain, I know many pharmacy owners would prefer to sell to another independent to keep it independent, and I'm all for that. But sometimes a chain is your best option. At some point, you have to do what's best for you, and sometimes that means selling to a chain. Because most chains calculate per script, you might want to focus on increasing your volume if you know you will sell to a chain. Okay. So marketing, right? Like it becomes, you want as many people to bring as many prescriptions to your pharmacy, because that'll increase that annual script count. Okay. And that's what chains want. Chains want people, they want data, they want the scripts. All right. So you want to use low cost marketing methods that are highly efficient. All right. So videos on social media, hands down, one of the best ways. My private client, Tom, some of you that are in our Facebook group saw this, but he did his first video the other day. So he joined our 75 Hard for Pharmacy Owners Challenge and committed to doing the things. And one of those was posting a video every day. So he posted his very first video, and I didn't look at it today, but within less than a day, his video had over 5,000 views. Like, amazing. And he didn't pay anything for that. It was completely free. He just had to have the balls to get on video and do a video, and he did amazing. So if you're in the Facebook group, go watch Tom's video. It did amazing. And it was just a beautiful example of how videos on social media can so reward that local small business pharmacy owner. And it's completely free. So referral programs is another great way. I added over 400 new patients for over a year and a half in my pharmacy, and a referral program was very much a good part of why we were able to increase so rapidly. So I love referral programs. Prescriber and community outreach, absolutely. Your doctor detailing, reaching out to where your people gather, like local churches or the bingo club or those kinds of things, like where you can reach many people with just one effort, is one of the best ways to do that. So here's my homework for you. Now, I will not be checking your homework. This is for you. Okay. You should still do it anyways. What is your end game number? And I would say many pharmacy owners that I talk to, they feel weird thinking about this number. I even fall into this trap many times. Like, what is your end game number? How much do you want to make? All right. Like, what would be ideal? You know, you can have a couple numbers. You can have like, this would be amazing. This would be my minimum. This would be really good. Figure out what your end game number is. All right. Does your current value get you there? How close does it get you there? Like, are we talking a little gap? Are we talking a big gap? Because let me tell you, the bigger the gap, the more change you're going to have to do. I will say that you should be able to get your pharmacy to whatever end game number you have. Just depends on your timeline and how much effort you want to put in. I have seen pharmacies completely turn around and 10x their value in the matter of a few years. Like, it is absolutely possible. I don't think any number is completely unreachable. Are you taking regular profit out of your pharmacy now? If you can't afford to pay you, a buyer is not going to want to buy your pharmacy unless they want to buy themselves a job. Okay. So figure out how to make your pharmacy better now so that you're taking regular profit, because that regular profit is really what a buyer is looking for. That's the profit that they want to pay you for, is that regular profit. Is your pharmacy bringing you financial freedom, or is it bringing you insecurity? And I know we just went through like the hardest 2 years in pharmacy ever. And so many pharmacy owners are feeling very insecure financially about their pharmacies. I don't think that's how pharmacy is supposed to be. That's certainly not the way that I design and I want pharmacy to be. I don't own pharmacies myself to bring financial insecurity. I own pharmacies and am looking to buy new ones to bring financial security and financial freedom, time freedom. I know, one of my inner circle members, she'd asked me one time, like, how much time do you spend on your pharmacies? And I was like, gosh, like, I don't know, maybe 10% of my time, sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more, like I don't spend as much time because they should be freeing for you. And if you set your pharmacies up right and you implement the right systems in your pharmacy, that is completely doable. It is completely possible. So really quick, before we open it up for all the Q&As, so if you have a question, put it in there. Here's my pitch to you. If you want to make your pharmacy better, here at DiversifyRx, I talk about you need to be a pharmacy CEO. Okay, navigating all of this, understanding all the different parts of the financials, understanding all the business, how cash flow does, how marketing does, how to improve your team. That's a lot of hats to wear, okay? And I truly believe that independent pharmacy owners need to be pharmacy CEOs. You need to be looking at all the different things. You don't have to do it all, but you need to understand all the different aspects of your pharmacy. In the past, you were okay as a pharmacy owner if you were just a kick-ass pharmacist. And that was okay. But our industry has changed and it is far too cutthroat. We need pharmacy owners to be CEOs. And that's what we do inside Pharmacy Badass University. I really focus on more patient impact because we're pharmacists first, right? We got to help our patients first. More freedom, that's both financial freedom and time freedom, and more security. Your pharmacy financial status should not be keeping you up at night, but I know for many of you that it is. So we've got to reverse that. All right. So we start with step one, reversing poor cash flow and profitability. Then in Pharmacy Badass University, we build solutions to explode your growth and reduce the chaos. Then we focus on scaling. So creating systems, creating dependability. You don't have to be there every moment of every day for your pharmacy to work. I have not visited either of my pharmacies in months. One pharmacy I've never visited personally, physically, just never has worked out that way. My other pharmacy I live closer to, I have visited it more often, but it's been months. So you create systems for continuous profitability, and then all about diversify, because diversification, DiversifyRx is what I love. I love sexy new revenue streams. Once you have your foundations, then you can just keep adding on revenue streams to create the security and freedom that you want. The level of financial freedom that you want might be different than the level of financial freedom that I want. And so you get to create the pharmacy of your dreams to be able to do that. And so that's just what PBU, a lot of people ask like what membership is about, and that's what it's about. So just to let you there. We also have our Pharmacy Profit Summit. Many people follow us and come to our Pharmacy Profit Summit every year, and they're like, great, I have my ideas and I can go forth and do that, and fantastic. So we have it in March every year. This coming year, it's the 23rd and 24th, which is a Sunday, Monday. We're going to be talking about medical billing, easy employee training, automated marketing, tax savings, AI in marketing, legal hot topics, compounding updates, PSAO analytics, direct contracting, and so much more to help you run your business better. I don't mess with a lot of fluff. I don't mess with a lot of like hoorah stuff. Like I want you to leave the 2 days at the Pharmacy Profit with like real tangible ways to improve your pharmacy. All right. So if you're interested in the Pharmacy Profit Summit, head over to pharmacyprofitsummit.com. If you have any questions, just ask. All right. I try to put all the information, on the website, but if there's something there that I didn't cover, like, yes. All right. Okay. Q&A time. So put in your questions. I'm going to run through the questions. I'll stay on as long as you all, have some questions. So, all right. Let's see. For the RX count, many pharmacies do not enter OTC RX due to transmission fees incurred, but they are lowering their RX count total. and buyers are looking for total RX. So for OTCs, as a buyer who looks at dispensing reports, I only look at the prescriptions. I don't count the OTC RXs anyways. We used to do a free vitamin program, and all of those prescriptions were entered as, a prescription. It was an OTC prescription. So I'm okay with it either way. You shouldn't on your OTC RXs be incurring any transmission fees because you should be cashing those out. Unless you're, for Medicaid, a lot of Medicaids, this is a great way to make a lot of profit, but a lot of Medicaids actually pay pretty well for OTCs. I know like in Kentucky, you can get your dispensing fee, which is a pretty generous dispensing fee, for magnesium and vitamin D and, a lot of over the counter. So those you would enter as prescriptions and you would transmit them because they're actually being paid for by the third party. So hopefully that gives you, so they would, and the chain would weed out the OTCs as well, because they're not interested in that. So let's see, is there a guide to what numbers we need on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to stay on top of the numbers? Absolutely. So we have an entire CEO dashboard that you can use in your pharmacy. I recommend tracking numbers weekly. I'm not a fan of daily. I just got more important shit to do, and I'm sure you do too. And really, frankly, there's not enough changes from the day to day. Monthly is a little too long of a time frame. Too many things can happen in a pharmacy in between there. So I like doing weekly numbers. Weekly numbers, focus on those. If you're kind of getting started, the first three I would start with are what I call the critical 3 KPIs. So if you've been watching me or reading our stuff or, listening or reading our blogs, I talk about 3 critical KPIs, which is your inventory turns, your payroll ratio, and your expense ratio. If those 3 are not green, those are the only 3 numbers you should be tracking. Okay. And once those get to green, then you can kind of like focus on some other things, but that is like plugging the hole of the bathtub. There's no point of pouring more water in if the drain is open. So the 3 critical KPIs are the very first things that you should be doing. Get those to green. And what I mean by green is at least above benchmark. Okay, so that payroll at least below 13, your inventory turns above 24, your expenses at least below 19, then it's green. You can always make them better, absolutely, but at least we're not in the red zone, right? So that's where I would start with, calculate your critical KPIs. If any of them are red, that's what you focus on. Easy peasy, that's what you go fix. If it's yellow, go fix it. Start with the red first. And get those to green before you start focusing on anything else, because that's the best way to shore up your cash flow. That's step 1 inside Pharmacy Badass University. So when somebody joins, that's the very first thing we take them through. Step 1 is reversing the poor cash flow and reversing the low profits. So, and those 3 critical KPIs are very essential to that process. So hopefully that answers your question for you. Let's see here. Oh, one more. So Carex, when you join the group, you're not selling your pharmacy. So Carex is not buying your pharmacy. You're just kind of affiliating yourself with the group, and they actually help you improve the operations of your pharmacy. So there's some changes, some things that you get access to when you join that group in order to streamline your operations. I think it takes some of the heavy lifting and some of the decision making off of you. So if you're feeling a little burnt out, you're like, geez, like, Lisa, you tell me it can be reversed, and I believe you can be reversed. I'm just not sure I'm willing to like do every bit of that. That might be an option because they kind of already pre-made some decisions and have some, structure for you. So I'm very big fan of following a plan of some sort. And so you're not selling your pharmacy now to Care. They're putting the group together to be able to sell in the future. Approximately 5 years from now is their timeline. Obviously that, can change as time goes on, but the goal right now is in 5 years in order to be able to get that really big multiple. So everybody gets more money as a part of that group. So hopefully that answered your question there. All right. That is all the questions I see. I will send you guys, I think what I promised to send, I think it was like the little AWP math thing. I'll send that out. If there's anything else, always, we'll send this recording. We'll send it out tomorrow. If there's anything that comes off this, I know many of you are going to be able to watch the recording. If you have any questions, you can just reply to that email. You can send me a message. We have drlisafaast.com. You can send me a message there. That way it won't get lost. I could say send me through social media, but sometimes I get a lot of messages in there and I miss one. So either reply to the email or go to drlisafaast.com. Here's my contact information again, one more time. So send me an email, go to drlisafaast.com, send me those questions, and I'm happy to help you answer those, because I just literally, I don't want to look at pharmacy owners and see them cry. Like, it just breaks my heart. And it's because our world is just different now, and we have to do different things now. It's just the world that we're in. Like, you can't really fight against that. And so the big payout at the end is still possible, but you have to make your pharmacy better to get the big payout. The free flowing money of a few years where, basically the big chains were just paying you to shut your doors. Like, the time is gone. Like, they're really evaluating your pharmacy. Buyers like me are really evaluating your pharmacy. And if you make it good, you make it a real business, people will reward you for that when buying good pharmacy businesses. So hopefully this was helpful for you. If you have any questions later, feel free to reach out. I will send the recording and the slides with you in the recording email. So that is it. I will let you all go. I don't see any other questions. Thanks for joining me. Hopefully this is helpful. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. So bye-bye, everybody.